supplement.
Maybe they had a cap of 100,000. What if they made 75,000 and they were fine? You wouldn't be supplementing to get up to 100,000, right?
No, so this is not an appropriation, okay? Let's be clear about that. We're not spending any money here.
It's a maximum.
Yes.
They can make up to that amount.
That's
It has
correct.
to
They
be
can...
Internally.
Internally, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not spending any town dollars to do this. This is money that comes in from various vendors or individuals who pay for programs, and then it goes back in, and then it can be used for that purpose,
I
okay?
just wanted to be reassured.
Yeah, what it does, in the first sentence of the article, it says, you know, to see if the town will vote to authorize annual spending limits. And that's all it is, authorizing a limit.
The reason it's done is because 99% of everything that the town does has to be voted via an appropriation of a town meeting. These, by law, you can do without that. So what they're doing is giving you a little bit of a governor to be able to say, we're setting, you know, we're putting it before the town meeting and saying, are you guys good with 100,000 being spent out of that account? And it just kind of keeps it clean for you.
It's stuck.
Put it on you.
Let me get it
Change your
on.
insurance.
All right, are we clear? Okay.
Yep.
Let's go on to Article 9 is the OPEB trust. So I think this is a question that maybe Joan had earlier. So this is getting back to the strategy, to the practice of appropriating money for the OPEB trust, which we do typically every year. The last 2 years, people we recall that we did not fund the OPEB in the budget or in the warrant, because we wanted to wait until, in the annual town meeting warrant, because we wanted to wait until we saw how much we collected for the previous fiscal year. So this current fiscal year, which is fiscal 2022, we will be back in the fall of fiscal 20, in fiscal, effectively fiscal 23, which will be same calendar year 22, and we will appropriate the amount of money for the OPEB amount, for the 22 amount. I'm trying to be confusing, but that's the only way I can describe it. There is a amount that we need to fund for the fiscal 22 amount, but will actually be made in fiscal 23, and that will catch us up to where we are with all the amounts that we need for keep the OPEB fund fully funded from day one.
So there's no action on this for this?
No. This article will take care of fiscal 23.
Okay.
You follow me?
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So this actually pays for fiscal 23, and we're back on schedule. Okay? So we were off schedule for 2 years. We're back on schedule with this year. All right? So and the reason why we had to do it that way is because of OPEB. I mean, because of COVID. So now we're out of COVID. We do anticipate a pretty good year coming up in terms of revenues for a better year than clearly a better year than we've had, with a lot of our stadium revenues, a lot of hotel meal tax is all starting to return back to what we previously were considered to be normal under most circumstances. So we should be okay to actually fully fund those in fiscal 23. I'm going to turn the next several articles over to Mike Johns, so that he can explain that we have contract agreements for the next 6 articles, all the way up to Article 15, correct, Mike? Article 10 through 15 will be collective bargaining agreements. Go ahead, Mike.
So first I'll give you an overview. So these are 6 contracts, each for 3 years, that would succeed the current contracts, which will end this June 30th. What these 6 articles are is appropriating the money to fund the first year of those contracts. So across all the 6 union contracts, our strategy for the negotiation team was to work to recover from the last 2 years of COVID. During that period, we took about a $5 million loss in revenues, and with that in mind, we planned from starting back in last August on how we're going to do this to kind of step out of where we had been back to stability, not knowing exactly what the future will be, so we planned very conservatively. We know that across the state and around our area that the cost of living increases for municipalities generally average right around 2%. That's what we have been for the past handful of years. But for this coming year that you're looking to fund these 6 articles, we negotiated 1.5% cost of living increases with every one of the unions, and that was what was agreed to. Within those, we feel like we came up with fair contracts for our employees, because if we don't treat them fairly, we won't keep them and we won't attract future employees. But we also have to be conservative, again, recover from COVID, and be fair to our citizens who are paying the bill for our employees, our workforce, and the services that our employees provide. So with that, we did, I think for the first time ever, we've negotiated all of our union contracts ahead of the end of the fiscal year that we're in. It has happened in the past that we've had some that have gone until the fall town meeting. And then what happens is that we have to go back and continue negotiating and then retroactively paying back to the previous July 1st whatever is owed to those employees because they lapsed without a new contract. So we were able, with a lot of, I think, foresight, good planning, and a lot of time spent at the table with each of our unions who put in a lot of work. And there was a lot of discussion, basically 5.5 months every week at the table here in this room. So with that, are there any general questions before I get into the specific contracts? So what I'll do is I'll go into each contract. Joan, general question.
Okay. You've been telling us that you'd like to have the budgets from year to year, maximum increase be like 3%. Mm-hmm. And so these, our inflation for the past 10 years, even more, has been minimal. You hardly have it in the economy I'm talking about. So when you negotiate 2% ahead like this now, and that doesn't leave much for anything else, 1% for the whole rest of the budget in town. So, everybody's already getting 2%, so.
Actually, they're not. They're getting 1.5%.
For this coming year, but after that, it's 2% and 2% already negotiated. Right. We are going to get higher inflation, and that is going to be an impact on them, so that would be the time to do it. I think it's been very generous. I know you think we compare to other towns. We're a small town, too. There aren't a lot of towns you can compare us to.
Actually, we do a lot of comparisons, Joan.
We have better service than any other town, that's for sure. No one's ever said we haven't, so we're very proud of that. But anyway, I think it's just going to be tight. And some of the things that we got, say, fire department, one of the provisions that they gave into was notify the fire chief 6 months before you're going to retire. Big deal. You know what I mean?
That actually, Joan, just if I can address that.
Anyway.
Joan, if I could just, if I could just interject for a second. So, I wanted to see if there were any general questions before we get into the specifics, but since we're into the specifics, I just want to address that one.
That's what I'm talking about in general.
So that one is a big deal.
No, for getting 2%, I don't think we ever, for giving them 2%, I don't think we got very much in return.
But I do just want to address the specific thing that you raised. And that was that you think it's not a big deal that we're going to get 6 months notification from firefighters when they're going to retire. That's actually a huge deal. And the reason it's a huge deal is because, first of all, we employ paramedics, which require an awful lot of training to get, if somebody comes in and gives us 2 weeks notice that they're retiring, we can't get a new paramedic in there to fill our shifts in 2 weeks. We can't do it in 2 months. Getting 6 months to retire, that's actually a big deal to us. And that means that we're able to always be ready to have, all the shifts covered with paramedics in the field. That's an important public service that we provide to our citizens. And I think people rely very heavily on our public safety, our police and fire. We're very proud of that. I know the citizens are. So it is a big deal. I don't think we should downplay that. That is a big deal.
It also means that we don't have to cover shifts on overtime. If somebody has to come in and cover that shift, then we would have to pay somebody overtime to cover that vacancy. So by not having the vacancy, you're able to pay the regular rate for the officer or the firefighter while they're actually performing that work. So it is a big deal. It's a very big deal.
Are there any other general questions before I get into the individual contracts? And then I'd be happy to take every single question you have, because I know you must have a lot. And I'd like to provide you with a lot of information.
Yeah.
Any general questions? All right. So for the fire contract, which we started touching on, so one of the things, as you probably saw when I briefed this to the selectmen, as well as anyone who was watching with the advisory committee, as they were briefed on the details of these contracts, was education incentives. So we think it's in the best interest of the citizens of this town to have highly trained and educated employees, and in public safety, as well as some other unions, including library. We offer education incentives for folks who will pursue higher education. So in that case, the fire employees, they already do receive some education stipends, and we agreed to increase those by a small amount over this contract. And we also eliminated the provision that allowed the payment of an annual stipend for someone who had 30 degrees towards a degree, but no degree. And we want to see people get those degrees, actually complete them. So we eliminated that part with agreement from the fire union. Next, and this was really an important one with both police and fire, is that the detail rates for fulfilling the details for construction projects, for events that happen on Route 1 or anywhere else in town, we were lagging way behind our surrounding communities. We were in around the $50 range, $50 to $54 range, and we were having trouble filling our details with our own people, but also because the surrounding towns are paying higher rates, we couldn't attract people from around the area. When we have an event on Route 1, we very often rely on surrounding community fire and police departments to fill those shifts. Even if there's something construction going on in another part of town and our officers and paramedics are down on Route 1, we need to still fill what's going on in the street. So what we've done, and by the way, if someone comes and their current rate, let's say in Mansfield or another community, is $65 an hour, and our rate is, let's say, 50, just for a round number, to attract somebody from that town that's paying 65, they come here, they get 50, they get our rate. So not only are we underpaying our folks who are out, doing hazardous duty, doing these details to our people, but we're having trouble attracting others. On top of that is the difficulty with demographic changes. Okay, back in the day when I remember my father working construction crews, and myself, we worked to get every overtime, every detail, every weekend. But nowadays, time seems to be as valuable or even more valuable to our younger generations in general. So it becomes that much tougher to fill overtime shifts, to fill details. So you'll see through here that vacation becomes very important. The detail rates, we have to pay more to get people to fill these shifts. If we can't fill these shifts, we struggle to actually put on these events that we rely on for revenue. Yeah, George.
Just one thing, when Mike's absolutely right when you say we pay more, but it's not we, it's the outside vendor that pays it. So when it comes up, it's whatever the XYZ company is paying that, not the town of Foxborough.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because that's a very important point. Whether it's National Grid or Columbia Gas or an event on Route 1 at the stadium, a concert, and so forth, the money comes through the town, it gets paid to our employees, by the town, but that money is generated from wherever that event or project is going on, and the town gets an administrative fee to cover the handling of that and the processing of that money and timesheets and so forth. So that's another reason, what George raises is another reason why this was such a critical component of our negotiations, to get us up to rate to fill those details, but also to not totally burden the cost of this contract on the citizens, but also share it with our business partners in the community or who come into the community to do projects. Okay. There's a small stipend for a physical fitness test that's added for our paramedics and firefighters. Throughout, it is very small, if that's what you were indicating.
No, I was just saying that fail with it.
Through this, as part of the strategy that I had mentioned, before even starting negotiations, was one, let's walk before we run, okay, or even crawl before we walk, so to speak, as we come out of this COVID period. So let's be as conservative as we can, see if we can get unions to agree to 1.5%. And by the way, that's the same thing that our non-union employees, including myself, are going to get, that 1.5%. So that's across the board. But then also, any costs that we can put further away into the contract, like into the second or third year of the contract, we feel gives us a better opportunity to crawl before we walk. So that's what we did. So we know we're getting behind on some of our pay rates, and I know some people find that surprising, some people don't. But we haven't changed a lot of our pay rates other than our cost of living increase over a number of years. So that's important, because if we get behind the market, one, we struggle to keep employees, and we have seen a lot of people move during this time. And two, as people move, we have even more trouble attracting new help if we're not competitive with the market. So in that, what we've done, instead of adding a new step, like an automatic 2% for anybody who's at the top step, what we did is we strategically planned to do a 15-year step, and in one case a 20-year step, so that somebody not only has to be at the top step of their grade, but they also have to have 15, or in another case 20 years of service with the town. So it prolongs a little bit, and that was, I can't overestimate how painstaking that was to negotiate that, but it was a necessity in getting through these contracts.
So Mike, just in the interest of time, because we actually went through this in detail at the selectmen's meetings, so anybody wants to go back and look at it, it's actually on tape. So you can actually go back and look at those. So I think if anybody here has a specific question about the contracts, I think now would be a good time to ask Mike about any one of the specific ones. So, because I think if we go through each one, it's going to take a long time. So I think if we do that, and I appreciate Mike's time in doing this, but I think this has already been done on TV. So I think so. So and I would say that anybody has any questions about a specific contract, now would be a good time to ask it for Mike.
Can I just chime in as a PSA?
Yeah.
So in order to watch the selectmen's meetings, here's how I do it. I go to YouTube,
Yeah.
and I go to Foxboro Cable Access. I
Yeah.
subscribe to them. So now that way, whenever I go onto YouTube, I just go to my subscriptions,
Right.
comes up Foxboro Cable Access, and I can see all the prior shows. So just for future reference, other way I do it is I go to Google, I Google YouTube, Foxboro Cable Access, Board of Selectmen, and it'll come up. So just little shortcuts, because nowadays everything's on, and it's
Right.
saved forever, I guess.
Right.
It's a great resource. So I'm just saying that, and then for folks watching at home, it's a
Yeah.
great way that it's actually accessible now just through a quick Google.
Yeah, not to, I mean, this is all important information, but it's already been done. So I just don't want anybody to think we're trying to miss any points here. But if anybody have any specific questions about any of the contracts for Mike?
Do you have a step in there to give those new kind of department heads, supervisor, whatever they're called, a step up? Is there already provisions in the contract?
Are you talking about
They can get increased
The pay,
amounts?
I'll answer that. So the pay increases for the different is already built into the budget.
Okay.
All right. So it's not.
That provision's already in there?
Yes, it's already
Not
built in.
something
Yeah,
new?
yeah. I saw.
So the second thing is, what is, and I know you don't have a responsibility, and we should have a school committee person or a school superintendent here or something, because that's part of one of the biggest budgets, and it's not questioned anymore, which it should be, because that's a place where we probably could be saving some money. But anyway, is there a schedule for the next 3 years, 1.5%, 2%, and 2%? One of you must know that.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Exactly the same.
Same thing.
Had theirs been set before ours? In other words, did they agree upon a contract? before you-
Actually, it's not necessarily. So the school unions and the town unions were negotiating at the same time. Some of the town unions settled ahead of some of the school unions, so there wasn't necessarily a sequence.
But it's all the same. It ends up all the same?
But it so happens that it is the same because we actually had a meeting very early on in the process before negotiations started to look at where are we and what's reasonable, to look at what's the forecast and how do we get out of COVID, how do we get past this $5 million revenue loss. So yeah, I believe they've come out.
2 and 2.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? I apologize for my enthusiasm. I want to jump in on this, but George and Marie and I have lived, eaten, and breathed this thing for literally 6 months, day in and day out.
Yeah.
So I just want to share all the information I can with you. So if you have questions, now's the time.
And I don't want to in any way, shape, or form minimize the effort that went into this. This took these guys and gals months and months and months to get these contracts done. And the fact that it was done before the end of the fiscal year and all 7 contracts, including the schools, right, were actually completed before the end of the fiscal year is extraordinary. I've never seen that in 40 years. I've never seen that happen. So congratulations to Mike and to George and to Marie for a job well done in this case, and Bill Euchner too, for that matter, for the work that they did to get these all done. And I'm really very appreciative of the work that they did. I just want to be. I'm not trying to take away, but it's a lot of information, and I think where we've already covered it, I want to just make sure that we leave time for other issues.
Can I make one last comment?
Sure. Go ahead.
This is something that I reiterated throughout the 6 months, and George can vouch for this. This was advice from a lawyer friend of mine many years ago in a civil litigation, something that goes to court. A good outcome is probably where each party comes out a little bit unhappy, and we talked about that a lot during negotiations. And I can tell you that's about how we came out with all of the contracts. Mm-hmm. The town did not get everything that it wanted in any of the contracts, nor did the employees get everything they wanted in every one of the contracts. But what we did is, by spending a lot of time and energy, we all came out with some good things and some things that we didn't get, but we came to agreement. And we came out with a workforce that's ready to keep doing what they've been doing, is providing tremendous service to the town without damaging those relationships and having resentment, but also without overspending on the wages.
Which brings up the question, what does the Personnel Wage Board do now? They used to do the negotiating for the town, and we had an appointed Personnel Wage Board. I think it was appointed by the selectmen. So what is their role now?
So they have a very limited role now. So they do actually work on all the policies.
On the what?
On all the policies, the town personnel policies. They actually approve all the town personnel policies. And then on the other side of that, which then get submitted to the selectmen for final approval. But they actually have a very limited number of employees who are not covered by any contracts. And it's probably, 13, Mike?
15.
15 employees covered by that. So they do set the wages for all of those folks. And if there's any changes in a wage scale or pay system, they would be the ones that would, in fact, look at that as well. Okay? Right. All right, so moving on to Article 16, which is a citizen petition for a Market Street easement. I'm going to let Paige address this one because she's familiar with this project.
Sure, so this is the property next to Judy's Florist. It's called, I think, the Bragg House, the White House next to that. And so that property is somewhat landlocked. They are on septic or cesspool probably. And they abut, behind them is an old broken down house that used to be owned by the housing authority. It's now owned by the town through a land swap. In the future, in the next year or so, that property is going to be redeveloped into a public parking lot that Doug King, the builder of the fire station project, is building for the town, and it'll be a public lot. anyway, we realized that the Bragg House, if it's ever to be upgraded or improved, would need to comply with septic requirements, and they could not. They are also not allowed to tie into sewer on School Street. Because of the rotary work done years ago, there is a moratorium on tying into sewer on School Street. So the only way they could get sewer is from Market Street. So we started thinking ahead, and we're like, before we have a developer go build us a beautiful new 14-space parking lot, we ought to make sure this landowner isn't going to ask us to rip it up if they need to do something with the sewer in the future. So we actually spoke to the landowner. She made the petition, and they're going to I don't even know that they're putting the sewer in, but at least they'll have the easement, so in the future, when they go to use that property, they do have the right to tie into sewer, and they'd have to pay for all the required charges and whatnot, but otherwise they would not be eligible at all, and they'd be landlocked, and they couldn't improve their property.
Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Article 17 is another citizen petition for a sidewalk on South Street. This is a petition from a resident who requested an appropriation of $75,000 for a new sidewalk. This is not being recommended by the Finance Committee or the Advisory Committee, and the reason being is the fact that after further review of the proposal, this particular individual had never come to the town to speak to any of the staff members or anybody in town about this request. It was just made as a petition article. The problem with doing that is the fact when you do the analysis of what it costs to do this would have cost close to $500,000. And the request is for $75,000. The reason being is that it actually crosses a river. And in order to do that, it would have been very costly to at least to make those improvements, to make that available. The other challenge we face is the fact that there are sidewalks that we currently have that we are trying to improve and are part of a strategic plan to actually fix those over the next several years. And we actually we've engaged a study with an engineering firm to actually come up with a plan to fix the existing sidewalks that we have. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense as such to spend $75,000 or even $500,000 on just a new section of sidewalk when we have a whole bunch of them that we need to fix first. So that was the whole idea. We appreciate that the person's request, thought it was a perfectly viable request to make, but from an operational and from a value perspective, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to do this. So it's not being recommended, but the person I suspect will be a town meeting to address this issue. And I think there's been said on some it's been said that this was an issue about sidewalks all over town. The answer is no. This is only for this one sidewalk in this one particular area. They may have a philosophical position on the thing, but on sidewalks in general, which we can all appreciate. But I think this particular request is only for one section of a road on South Street. So that's all this is. Okay. All right. Article 18 is another citizen's petition. This was another one that was not recommended, and I think this is an interesting article, though, because the request was made from a former AdCom chairman, actually, believe it or not, who made a request because he was concerned about how getting notification on when zoning issues change in town. And this particular individual has a very distinct position on how he feels about certain articles and certain housing articles, and really wants to make sure that the entire town has proper notice about it. Well, the method in which this is being proposed would be, first of all, it would be costly to the town to do this. Anything about $5,000 every time we had to do it would be just for postcard and for mailing costs alone. So, and that would be just to let people know this is going to happen. I think there is something to be said, however, that philosophically there is something to be said about, can we do a better job of notifying people about these articles when they come up? And the answer is probably yes. But we'd love to hear more about what that means. Because right now it's a very difficult issue. It's one that's plaguing communities across the country, not just Foxborough or any place in Massachusetts for that matter. It's a very challenging issue. Mike and I just were at a national meeting about this issue recently, and everybody in the room was still challenged by what's the best way to deal with this. So there's different ways to look at this, but I think the one that's the way that's being proposed here is one that folks couldn't get behind because of, first of all, the cost and the method that's being proposed. But it does warrant further discussion, and I think that's a very valid point that this gentleman has raised. So I think it's something that we'd like to talk about further. But since this is a zoning matter, I'll let Paige weigh on it as well. So
Yeah, the challenge with this is, well, first of all, from what I heard from town council, is this article as written doesn't have any action in it. Like, it doesn't actually set out a bylaw or tell us how to do
Right.
it. So it's more of a referendum, and to Bill's point, we hear that. And in fact, Bill and I have been engaged, and Nike have been engaged in engagement in how to get community involved. You all know about town meeting, but it's amazing every year, if you look on Facebook, people are like, they don't even know what town meeting is. And so that's an interesting problem that we need to deal with. Duly noted. But from a risk perspective, the other thing that was identified is, how do we decide who's impacted and who isn't, and what if we don't do the notification correctly, or, what's the gray area? So this doesn't outline any of that process of how we'd figure out, does it affect everybody? Does it affect only one neighborhood? Who makes that decision? What is the fix if you mess it up? That sort of thing. So I think, to Bill's point, is it's a conversation we need to continue to have. We'd love to hear from the residents of, how do we engage? I mean, we try things like email and newspaper and,
Social media.
signs on the common, and we still think that the bulk of people typically don't even know what town meeting is or what it means. So it's really difficult.
Mike had a thought.
One thing that's come up in many discussions about this article is that people think that maybe it shouldn't be just zoning articles that are highlighted, is that all the articles, in fact, town meeting in general, why shouldn't we raise the awareness about everything going on at town meeting? And I think that's been generally accepted as, what can we do about raising the bar and awareness and education for everybody on all articles?
Sorry, it's a very good point.
I know
Yes.
periodically you have a quorum problem at
Yeah.
town meeting. I mean, are people interested? Are they just letting Joe do it or whatever? And
Well, I think it's a very good point, Bob. I mean, it's the world we live in nowadays, which people have busy lives, and they have both parents work, and they have long hours, and then they have family issues to tend to at home, and so it becomes difficult for them to squeeze these kind of issues in. And let's face it, if it's not affecting you directly, you're not going to go.
no,
You're just not, because it's that kind of a world we live in. Because it's if it means something to me, I'm going to be there because I'm going to make time for it. But if it really doesn't mean that much to me, I'm not going to go. And that's just unfortunate. But so I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't know what the right solution is. But we're all ears, and I think we're all open to having conversations about what be. And maybe this isn't the right answer, but maybe there is one buried somewhere amongst all the different ideas that are out there to try and make something that might work more effectively. Yes.
When did everybody get like a tax bill or something in time relation to the town meeting? It could go out, something like a notification to every household could go out with something else that's going out.
That's a fair point. So let me just, with tax bills, there's a limitation in state law that we can't do that. We cannot do that. However, with water bills, water and sewer bills, you can. All right, so that's a different
But not
issue.
everybody's on water and sewer.
Right.
So there's our.
But therein lies, but you do get a lot of people on water,
Yeah.
which you could probably get, not so much on sewer, of course, but maybe on water, you could probably get that word out a little bit more effectively. So maybe that's an idea,
But
maybe
it
a
really
thought.
begs the question, I mean, so Mark just told us this morning about a mailing he did, so it's about $5,000 to do a postcard. But my fear is, even if you send a postcard out, I mean, I don't know about your mail, but I don't hardly look at anything, and particularly a little postcard like that. That's just like what the real estate agents are sending, and I'm like, whoop, whoop. I mean, touch it once, it's in the recycle bin. So, for $5,000+ we don't know if we'd be getting the bang for the buck. I mean, some
Right.
people would see it, but those that are probably not paying attention probably wouldn't even pay attention to that. So it's.
So I'll just share a story with you. Yesterday, my wife picked up the mail, and I hadn't seen the mail, and she didn't pick it up the day before on Monday. So we had a little bit of mail, right? I started looking through it last night, and I was at the counter for 5 minutes, looking for the things I needed to open open those things, the rest of them are right in the trash. So how do you know which is going to be that important thing that we want to look at? Now, granted, a water bill I would pay attention to, you know, and a sewer bill, but would I pay attention to anything that's attached to it? I don't know. Depends upon, you know, what color it was. Maybe it really draw my attention to it. I don't know, but that's just just a one person's reaction to it.
And you're only going to have a single note. Like, you can't put content on there. You can really just say, oh, by the way, the warrant's available.
It's just
I mean, we have those on the Rotary, you know, town meeting, and it still doesn't
Right.
get anybody to come, so.
The answer is probably somehow multimedia.
Right.
Because not everyone pays a tax bill. You know, if you live in senior
goes through
housing.
mortgage company, yeah.
If you live in senior housing or you're in an apartment complex, okay, you're paying
your house
rent.
is paid for.
But you don't get an individual check. Everybody doesn't get a water bill. Everybody doesn't check the internet. Everybody doesn't get our thinning newspaper. So it's got to be multimedia. We've got to hit people from all angles, and what goes in there is the question. We'd love to hear your
I would say it's a losing battle.
It's a challenge.
You're not gonna, people don't care.
No,
People do not care about anything.
that's the answer right
Well, you all do because you're here. So
Yeah, look at
that's
us.
I know.
We don't make a quorum.
That's why I know.
Right.
So thank you all for being here. I really do. We appreciate you being here.
And Paul
Right,
Beck
so-
is back there putting us out live and recording. There he is waving to us.
Did this go out to all the townspeople, like in the Reporter, or, I don't know?
Yeah, the reporter. The problem with the reporter is that you're shrinking violet as
I'm
well.
saying, was this open to everyone and you're publicizing it?
And
Shrinking violet.
makes a few errors, and it.
Oh, a lot of errors. Noticed.
It's not, listen, but that's happened actually within the past 10 to 12 years, because I remember when I first came here, the reporter you'd read the Reporter every week.
Worth reading.
And there was a lot of stuff in there, but now what's
I read it
happened,
every week.
social media has really dug into their effectiveness. You know, and so what's happened is that people read social media, and the problem with that is that you don't know if even half of it's true. All right, and so there's no check and balance on that.
And social media, Facebook, it's a bunch of crap. You got people still asking, what's going on down there by the post office?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell's the matter with them?
Yeah, that's a good question sometimes. I mean, I get it. It's the challenge we face in the world we live in. All right, I'm going to move on to Article 20, all right, because I know we're, in the interest of time, we're moving, we're already past an hour here, so I want to try and keep it to about an hour and 15, 20 minutes. All right, so Article 20 is a canvas, door-to-door canvassers and solicitors improvement. So this is a bylaw change where, in fact, if you don't want to be solicited, you can be put on a no solicitation list, and you would have to actually reach out to the police department. And you would send them a notification that they would be put on the list. And if somebody took out a license to do door-to-door canvassing, which is by the way not nearly as popular as it used to be. A lot of people just don't at home. Number one. Number two is the fact that it's people don't want to be bothered by people coming to their door, and they're concerned about who's going to be at the door when they answer it. So that being the case, if you don't want to be solicited, you can be put on a no solicitation list based upon this new bylaw change. That's the more or less the Reader's Digest version of this, and we'll actually come up with some different. The police chief will speak to this as well, and yes, good question.
But I really think that some of the people who come to my door didn't go and register.
Okay.
Okay, so that does me no good to be on this list, because those people are gonna come to my door anyhow.
So this puts a little more teeth in that in the bylaw. But so if you ask them, you tell them, look, I'm on a non-solicitation list, and they don't leave, you can actually call the police department. They will respond.
Now, do they have an actual tag or something so that I can
They're supposed to have an
verify?
ID. They're supposed to have an ID as
So I can
indicated.
ask for an ID?
You ask for an ID that says, or that they said you have a town solicitation permit,
Thank you.
which is something
Okay.
they're supposed to provide for you.
Okay.
All right.
I don't.
Any further questions about this? I know it's a lot of language, but what we did effectively replace the former language with the new language. Okay? All right, let's get into Article 21. This is going to be an interesting article. 21 is marijuana. Now, most people have probably heard this story probably at least 10 times so far. But we're going to tell you just for the sake of just covering it tonight, this afternoon, that back about 7 years ago, 7 years ago? Or
2017.
Five years ago, 2017, thank you. 5 years ago, the town voted, we did a non-binding referendum. That's really an important thing to remember. Non-binding referendum. So all it was an opinion poll of the residents to see if, in fact, they would support the sale of marijuana in Foxborough. And back then, the answer was no. It came back pretty significant, about 60-40. I think it was something in that range. And as a result of that, the town actually came back, and then the following week, we went to town meeting with an article that would allow for medical marijuana sales, and the town voted no against that.
No.
What's that?
Well, no.
Medical marijuana is first, right?
But you did adopt that. That, we do have medical marijuana.
I'm sorry, I apologize. It was the regular marijuana.
Recreational.
Marijuana. The town voted no for that.
Okay.
So thank you for clarifying that, yeah. So what happened was, since that time, the town said, we're not ready for this yet. We want to wait and see what happens with the towns around us. And so what happened was that a number of towns around us actually adopted it. And it is a significant revenue stream that comes with that, because you can charge a 3% tax on each transaction. So that means that we started looking at the various cities and towns that have adopted it statewide, and an extraordinary thing happened this past year, that marijuana sales in Massachusetts actually exceeded alcohol sales in terms of tax revenue. So that being the case, that caught a few folks here attention, say, what are we really missing out on this opportunity? So in the meantime, we did have an owner of a parcel up on Annette Road who approached the selectmen and said, we would like to at least look at this. Is there an interest in doing this? And at the time, the individual was prepared to make the request themselves. But upon further review and discussion, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do that because, first of all, there'd only be 1 or 2 licenses available in the town if they did that, and there was no guarantee if they put forward the argument that they would in fact get a license because they might not have the best proposal. Okay, does everybody follow that? So what happened was that their counsel came back to us and said, would the town be willing to at least look at this? And the board had an appetite for at least looking at it, and say, look, let's put it out to the community and see what the community thinks. And because now that it is in fact a revenue opportunity for the town, it does make sense for us to consider this. So and now that we see communities like Mansfield, like Plainville, Sharon, Attleboro, all these communities around us are all selling it, and we're just missing out on the revenue opportunity because it's here. More interesting than that was communities such as Brookline, who has about 5 establishments, came and spoke to our police chief and said, of all the places that we've had, we have fewer problems with those facilities than anything else, like an alcohol. So an alcohol sale. So we think that this is actually not a bad thing. We do think that there are a number of things we still have to do, and there's going to be a process that we'll have to go through. But if it were to get passed, it would be limited to just a few locations in town, a few zones in town with an overlay district.
The map's right there.
And the map is right there, which would tell everybody that it would go in only in certain areas of town, and that's it. And there was only 2 licenses that we could actually adopt here in Foxborough. And in both cases, they would have to come before the Board of Selectmen for an approval process, as well as go to the planning board. So it's a process to get this. It takes about a year just to get a license. So even if we were to pass this in 2 weeks, or less than 2 weeks, you wouldn't see a license in Foxborough for at least another year, maybe a year and a half, given the amount of time it takes to get this done. So with that in mind, I'm happy to take any questions. I'd like to have Paige say a few words about it, because they've done a great job with pulling the details together on the zoning side, and then in doing a combination of work with the selectmen to try and advocate for, or at least explain to folks what the options are and what it entails. I'll turn it over to Paige.
Yeah, so much like the selectmen's approach, I think the planning board too is, it was presented to them from the selectmen, and we're putting it forward for consideration for the townspeople. Like, I think many people were surprised. I have here some numbers that, didn't bring my printout, so I apologize, but I have here, Sharon. I think the big one was Sharon. We all know Sharon is a quiet little town, and they have a dispensary and a cultivation facility.
they do.
They made, let's see, last year, $325,431 in revenue, plus an additional $228,541 in impact fees. So that's, for a little community like Sharon. And when did they open? Let's see, they opened in August 2020. So they didn't even have a full fiscal year, I don't believe, for that. Millis, another small town, that's only 8,000 people. They have 370,000 and plus in revenue with almost 500,000 in impact fees. So we went through and we took a look at the numbers. We also did communicate with Chief Grace, and I have here, he says, I've reached out to Sharon, Mansfield, and Plainville since the last meeting in Brookline. He gathered additional information. They said the impact from a police perspective has been minimal. Crime and other public safety concerns have been minimal within their communities. Sharon and Plainville's are off Route 1 and both have ample parking to avoid traffic issues. Mansfield is in the shopping district, and the design and flow of traffic has not been an issue. At first, Chief Grace, when we first brought it up, he was deer in the headlights, oh no, and then as he's done more research, I'm not saying he's jumping up and down for this, but he certainly, I believe he said he'd rather, he's more concerned about drinking at this point than this. So I won't put words into his mouth, but we did have him, do a lot of talk with the police department, and I think at this point, we're all just looking to see what the residents want to do. I mean, it's an opportunity, but it's not something that any of us are necessarily attached to. It's just more for the residents to consider.
Yeah, we're not, Bonnie, did you
Yeah, I
want to
want
say
to just say, this is a 6-page zoning article, and from a zoning perspective, it addresses the issue. But what it really boils down to is, are these activities that Foxborough wishes to permit, the cultivation of marijuana and the retail sale of marijuana products? So you have 6 pages of zoning regulation, which appropriately, again, addresses the issue from a zoning standpoint. But are these uses of land, are these activities that we as a community, wish to approve? And as Paige has indicated, there's certainly a fairly significant revenue stream that would be provided to the town if we do allow it.
Mike, do you have anything? No, it's okay.
Paige, reading this map from here is very difficult. Could you just give an overview of where the overlay districts are?
Sure, let me just go over to the map.
The yellow is very pale. And
I know, it's hard. So we're looking at Route 1 and that whole area, Panis Park, all Route 1 area. And then down here, we have Springbrook, East Belcher, and then over sort of in the Forbes Crossing area. So that's the general areas. They're all, non-residential, so.
That's up by the stadium.
yeah, that's,
Yep.
yeah, stadium is that.
Stadium's here.
Yeah.
So on both sides, it goes, all the way down to, this is East Street, this is Pine Street, so the lumber company's there. So it goes further down, right up, almost to the Rentham line. Or actually to the Rentham line there. It doesn't include the state police barracks. I don't know why. So, but yeah, our major sort of industrial areas are where we included.
Thank you.
Yeah, Billy.
So I think that it would be a great help to get this money in. I wasn't really for marijuana before, but
Yeah.
it's going to help the new community center immensely. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't for it before, but now that she's tried it, she likes it.
It's legal now.
That's yes, I'm sorry.
What
Yes.
will happen with the drug-free zones? Because I know we've got signs up that. Around the schools? Yeah.
Sure, those will actually remain in place, and they're actually, in the zoning itself, does address the issue of where these facilities can be located. So it's, that was taken into consideration, so they will remain in place. Yes.
Have the businesses, well, especially craft, have they been kind of notified that these specific sites are the ones that we're recommending? Is it, public knowledge to both, all the industrial, areas that we've
Yes.
pointed out. I would think I'd be concerned about that, just looking at ahead of time that, why the town's doing it and so forth.
I think they're all lining up, actually.
Yeah, just so you know, Joan, I mean, they were, initially, they had actually approached us early on, not based on the person. They actually expressed an interest in whether or not the town, they actually asked if the town would be interested in looking at this. So, early on.
A while ago.
A while ago.
Yeah, we didn't do anything for that one, but,
Yeah.
we have not done any formal notification of any parties beyond what we're doing now. But I think, there are various parties aware.
Right.
They're keeping eyes on it. We even had some marijuana cultivators at our public hearing, or I don't know if they were cultivators or retailer, but we had some industry folk in the back of the audience. We didn't know who they were, but we saw the sign-in sheet. So obviously, people are watching. I think Foxborough is probably a highly desirable location.
Yeah, those are great locations.
Yeah. So it's become so mainstream in many ways now that that folks, it isn't really nearly as controversial as it once was. And so I think, however, it does, some people do feel strongly about it, and I can certainly respect that. But I think that we have to look at it realistically from the perspective that we're surrounded by it. We might as well, if we're going to miss out we want to miss on a revenue opportunity if we can. So she had a question.
As one of the little people in this room, my concern, I have a couple concerns about marijuana. First of all, I'm a retired nurse.
Yeah.
I do see it as a gateway drug.
Mhm.
I do not want to tell the younger people, oh, too anxious? Yeah, have a joint,
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way to go. And I would be concerned going out of here that somebody that I might encounter driving had a joint and was not particularly good driver under the influence of marijuana. And I would also say, don't be seduced by the tax money.
Mhm.
You might be going down the wrong road.
So you're actually the kind of person that will have the debate in that regard. So because I know because there are folks who think that first of all that there's a debate whether or not it really is a gateway drug. That question has not been answered yet.
Now, by the
but-
same token, I don't deny people in chronic pain.
No, that's true, that's true. But I think with respect to, people under the influence, they shouldn't be under the influence of anything when they drive their vehicle, period. And so I don't disagree with you on, but I think the reality is that, and what has been identified so far is that it's actually better than alcohol in terms of the impact. So strangely enough, that, now I'm not advocating for anybody to do that, trust me. I want to be clear about that, but the impact from what I'm hearing is less impactful than alcohol. in that respect.
And now, do we have any studies that show the relationship between smoking marijuana and lung cancer? I mean, just smoking in general is
Yeah,
supposedly unhealthy for you.
Yeah, I think smoking in general is in fact unhealthy, and I think I don't have any studies that show marijuana versus tobacco, but it becomes such a diverse industry that it's not just limited to smoking and marijuana anymore. There's edibles, things of that nature that
That's true.
so
And that's how they seduce the young kids into it.
yeah. Well, there's controversy. There's no question. There's some controversy about the sale of marijuana or marijuana byproducts, but and that's the debate that rages on. But what I'm saying to you and what we're just explaining to folks is that it's become much more mainstream, and some of the original beliefs about what it was have not been proven to necessarily to be as strong as they thought initially. So I think your points are very well heard and very well taken, but I do think that there are different debates about that one, and that's going to be up to the town to decide that. Okay? All right. Hey, Joan.
I think that we have a number of paid officials up here presenting all of this to us. And I think someone like, as far as I know, Bonnie Over is a volunteer and has done so much work. And that 6 pages of zoning, I'm sure he used, other samples and so forth, but he does so much work for this town. He should be recognized as a volunteer that does do that, rather, as I say, you're all paid for it.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Who gets a gold star later?
That's right. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is one where Bonnie was more of an editor and a sort of an advisor in this one. Town council actually drafted most of this one particular article, but Bonnie was more of a. But he does quite a bit of work for us, and I will tell you that we're truly grateful for everything he does. So, all right. So with that said, I'm going to move on to Article 22, and this is primarily the reason why I think Bonnie wanted to be here, because he had something to do with the actual writing of this article. But I will say that this is another one where this is a potential revenue stream for the town, and this is particularly interesting because we were approached by the possibility of somebody who was interested and wanted to put a electronic billboard on 95, and in Foxborough we currently don't have any such billboards. We have billboards along Route 1, but the current bylaw does not allow for electronic billboards to be, or any kind of billboard to be built along 95. So the talk was whether or not it made sense for us to put one, two, or three potentially on 95, and the revenue that comes from that can actually help the town as well. This is interesting because we actually have a potential site that could be a town site, that could be a site for one of these such boards, and because at the DPW facility, because it actually abuts 95. What's even more interesting about it is the fact that the revenue that could actually help to renovate that facility, which has not been renovated in many, many years. So we thought about that as a potential option for the town as well. The talk has been limited to just electronic billboards and not the stationary billboards. For a couple of reasons. One is the fact that the electronic ones tend to generate more revenue, number one. Number two, they require less maintenance in that regard. And the technology is such now that the impact is very, very minimal on even folks that are living around it. But that said, there was quite a bit of discussion at the Board of Selectmen's level and with Bonnie as an advisor on this matter, as well as town council and a number of people who weighed in on this, that we would actually create some very strict limitations on this, so that at the end we would only have 2, maybe 3 billboards along 95. There is no opportunity for us to build along 495. This does not include 495, and it hasn't been that didn't come part of this discussion, and whether or not it happens in the future remains to be seen. But 95 would be limited to just 2, possibly 3, depending upon where these would be built. And the reason why it's done that way is because there is a significant separation between the boards, and also because there is a ramp from 95 onto 495, which actually impedes some of the construction as well. So we have taken that all into consideration, and that is the proposal that's been listed here before you. I can't tell you how much revenue we would actually get until the board was actually in place, and we had a bid as to who would actually sell the board to or take the board over for the town, but that would have to be bid out, and so we would have to find out what that would actually be. But even if we don't own the board itself, the town actually can do a host agreement on those signs, which then means we also have an additional opportunity for revenue that comes to the town on that as well. So we are at the point where, again, the last 2 articles, 21 and 22, do have revenue streams attached to them, which I think is interesting because it's non-tax revenue. Doesn't mean we can impact your local taxes because of that, and it provides another additional opportunity for funding that could be used for a number of things in town, as some of them which already have been mentioned. Yeah, been mentioned. So happy to take any questions on that one, and certainly happy to let Bonnie say a few words about it if you'd like.
I just want to add 2 points. First of all the bylaw does is authorize electronic billboards on 95 or alongside 95. In order for somebody to construct and operate a billboard, you would need to get a special sign permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. Mm-hmm. And the Zoning Board of Appeals has authority not just to say yes or no, but if it says yes, to impose appropriate conditions. And second, the only reason there are not in the bylaw at the present time any authorization to construct and operate any billboards along 95 is not because we specifically have said no. It's just that when we were considering a revision of the sign bylaw back in 2014, because at that point in time, there were only billboards along Route 1, we just considered to include billboards along Route 1. We never even raised the discussion of billboards along 95. So it's not as if the bylaw currently says you cannot have billboards along 95. It's just silent on the issue because we just never even
It just never
discussed
came
it.
up, never came up. And what's interesting is that the electronic billboards have become more commonplace now. If you're heading south on 95 from Boston, if you come over the Walpole line, there are 3 of them right there. So that's, seeing that, we would probably want, that's why I think there was some discussion about limiting it, so we didn't have that many close together like that, bunched together like that, but, so, yeah.
I know they're on 95, but I go back to a few years back when you drive from here to Florida, billboards everywhere.
Right, right.
And there was a big move at the time to eliminate
Right.
billboards off of the interstates. Has the federal government changed their philosophy on this now?
Yeah, so there's still a permitting process that you have to go through, Bob, and so even if we were to allow it, we still have to go through a permitting process in Boston, which allows us to whether or not that will be done. But generally speaking, there has been more openness towards the use of electronic billboards along major highways as opposed to the stationary ones. I think that you're thinking going back to the Eisenhower years where
Oh, yeah.
where they did Highway Beautification Act.
Yes.
Where there was, and what was going on was there were a number of these billboards, but they weren't maintained at all, and as a result, they became eyesores, and it became, in some cases, it became too many. So this was a case that was taken into consideration when we developed this bylaw. We don't want to be a flurry of them. We want to have a few that make sense for the community, but don't really have a bunch of them.
Now, we look and say 2 to 3. Is that northbound, southbound, or?
I think all of them are located would be on the southbound side, maybe one on the northbound
I think
side.
one would be on northbound.
One will be on the northbound
Or
side.
one that a party has indicated some interest in constructing one
Yeah.
on the northbound side. But just a further point, as far as what Bill was saying, if the zoning board approves any billboard, then that party has to go get a license from the State Outdoor Advertising Board, which is part of the Department of Transportation.
Right.
They have fairly extensive regulations as far as what a billboard can and cannot do. Some of those regulations we've also adopted in our sign bylaw, and regardless, one of the conditions we always impose is compliance with the state regulations. The state has a contract with the federal government that governs what can or cannot be done with respect to highway billboards, and actually any highway sign.
So that concludes the town meeting, folks. And hopefully in another week and a half, we'll be able to say, this is it. This is it. So any further questions before we kept you here almost 92 minutes, 93 minutes. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
I got a question about money coming into the town.
Sure.
Whatever happened when there's up a lot, the water tank up on highway, on the Route 1? A big water tank up there.
So that money goes actually to the water department. It does not come to the
But there's
town.
no sign on there, so there's no money.
Right. Right.
So we've been talking about getting money from that for years.
Yeah, for whatever reason, that has not drawn the level of attention that we thought it might. We thought, yeah.
We just got a check for 22,000.
Yeah, but I think that was for the one inside Gillette.
Oh, okay.
It was
On
one
the other
inside,
side of the
yeah.
road.
Yeah, the one inside Gillette actually does generate some
Yeah,
revenue
we
for
just
us.
got a check for that one.
Yeah, but there is no, for the one on side, I'm actually surprised by that. You can see that for miles, it seems. And, a couple miles. And, I always thought that would be neat to have a Patriots logo on it, or, a Nike swoosh, or, one of the major companies that corporately sponsor that, but they've never taken interest in it.
And if they
Which is
don't,
interesting.
put Foxborough across it.
Yeah, that's still a possibility too, Joe,
They can paint right over it if they
Yeah,
want someone else.
yeah,
wants to buy
if
it.
nobody wants to put Foxborough right on it. Yeah, that's a good thought, actually.
but nothing.
No, yeah, not getting a lot, not for those, not for that one.
No Patriot flag on the flagpole.
No, I know.
Nothing.
Can't help you with that one. Sorry. All right, thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time. All right.
Okay, good.